Long before any throne was established in Israel, long before a crown ever touched a human head, there was a barren woman who whispered a sacred vow inside an ancient sanctuary. That vow would unleash a prophecy destined to echo across the generations. Her prayer wouldn't merely bring forth a son, it would give birth to a seer, one who would anoint monarchs and declare their downfall. Within the shadows of Shiloh's tabernacle, God prepared to speak once more. But this time, his message carried a warning. Israel stood at a pivotal moment they couldn't yet perceive. Would they remain beneath divine sovereignty, or would they demand a king, mirroring the nations around them, and in doing so seal their own fate with their very words? What transpires in 1 Samuel is nothing less than prophetic destiny crashing headlong into human desire. A shepherd boy receives a secret anointing while the reigning king still occupies the throne. A giant blasphemes against God only to fall from a single stone. A friendship forms that will outlast death itself. And a rejected monarch spirals into madness, turning to forbidden spirits in the darkness, hearing the precise hour of his destruction spoken by a voice rising from beyond the grave. Every conflict, every act of betrayal, every narrow survival was orchestrated by the unseen hand of Providence, positioning pieces across a cosmic game board toward one unavoidable outcome. The founding of a royal line that would eventually produce the ultimate king. This is 1 Samuel, where prophecy transforms into history and history transforms into prophecy. There lived a man called Elkanah in the hill country of Ephraim. 2 wives belonged to him, Peninnah and Hannah. Peninnah bore children, but Hannah remained childless. Each year, Elkanah brought his family to Shiloh to worship and present sacrifices to the Lord at the tabernacle. And each year, an identical, painful cycle would repeat itself. When sacrifice day arrived, Elkanah distributed portions of meat to Peninnah, along with all her sons and daughters. To Hannah, though, he gave a double portion, because his love for her ran deep, even though the Lord had shut her womb. Here's where the conflict began. Chapter 1, verse 6 tells us, her rival would provoke her severely, irritating her, precisely because the Lord had closed her womb. Year after year, Peninnah taunted Hannah, ridiculing her barrenness until Hannah wept and refused food. Elkanah attempted to console his wife. In verse 8, he asked her, "Hannah, why are you weeping? Why won't you eat? Why is your heart grieving? Am I not worth more to you than 10 sons?" Yet his words, despite their good intentions, couldn't mend the deep wound of her childlessness. During one of these annual journeys to Shiloh, after the meal and drinking had concluded, Hannah stood and approached the tabernacle. Eli, the priest, sat on his seat next to the doorpost of the Lord's temple. Hannah existed in profound anguish. Chapter 1, verse 10, reveals she was deeply distressed, praying to the Lord while weeping bitterly. In her suffering, she made a vow before God. Verse 11 preserves her words. "O Lord of hosts, if you will truly look upon the affliction of your servant, remember me, not forget your servant, but grant your servant a son. Then I will dedicate him to the Lord for all the days of his life, and no razor will ever touch his head." She prayed silently, emptying her heart before God. Her lips moved, yet no sound emerged. Eli observed her and reached the wrong conclusion. He assumed she was intoxicated. In verse 14, he confronted her. "How long will you continue being drunk? Put away your wine." Hannah responded with dignity and honesty. Verse 15 records her reply. "No, my lord. I am a woman deeply troubled in spirit. I've consumed neither wine nor strong drink, but I've been pouring out my soul before the Lord." She went on in verse 16, "Do not consider your servant a worthless woman, for I have been speaking from my great anxiety and vexation all this time." Once Eli grasped the truth, his tone shifted completely. He blessed her in verse 17, declaring, "Go in peace, and may the God of Israel grant the petition you've made to him." Hannah believed this declaration. She responded in verse 18, "Let your servant find favor in your sight." Then she departed, ate her meal, and her face no longer carried sadness. Early the following morning the family rose, worshipped before the Lord, then journeyed home to Ramah. Chapter 1, verse 19, tells us what followed. Elkanah knew Hannah, his wife, and the Lord remembered her. The timing matters. God heard Hannah's prayer and provided an answer. In due season, Hannah conceived and gave birth to a son. Verse 20 explains, "In due time, Hannah conceived and bore a son, and she named him Samuel, for she said, 'I have asked for him from the Lord.'" The name Samuel signifies heard by God, serving as a perpetual reminder of how this child came into being. The following year, when Elkanah traveled to Shiloh for the annual sacrifice, Hannah remained at home. She informed her husband in verse 22, "Once the child is weaned, I will bring him, so he may appear before the presence of the Lord and remain there forever." Elkanah supported her choice, saying in verse 23, "Do what appears best to you. Wait until you've weaned him. May the Lord only establish his word." So Hannah stayed home, nursing her son until weaning was complete. In those times, children typically nursed for 2 or 3 years. Each day spent with Samuel held precious value for her, knowing she would soon fulfill her vow to God. When the proper time arrived, Hannah prepared for the trip to Shiloh. Verse 24 describes what she carried. When she had weaned him, she took him up with her, along with a 3-year-old bull, an ephah of flour, and a skin of wine, and she brought him to the house of the Lord at Shiloh, and the child was young. They slaughtered the bull and presented the child to Eli. Hannah stood before the priest, who had once mistaken her for drunk. She addressed him in verse 26, "O my Lord, as you live, my Lord, I am the woman who stood here in your presence, praying to the Lord. For this child I prayed, and the Lord has granted the petition I made to him. Therefore I have lent him to the Lord. As long as he lives, he is given to the Lord." Right there, Hannah worshipped the Lord. She returned to God the very gift he had bestowed upon her. This wasn't a cold exchange. This was a mother fulfilling a sacred commitment, trusting that God would care for her son better than she ever could. Hannah's heart flooded with worship. What poured from her mouth next wasn't simply a prayer of gratitude. It was a prophetic song unveiling deep truths about God's character and his future plans. Chapter 2 opens with these words in verse 1. "My heart exults in the Lord. My strength is exalted in the Lord. My mouth derides my enemies, because I rejoice in your salvation." She continued in verse 2, "There is none holy like the Lord. There is none besides you. There is no rock like our God." Through her suffering, Hannah had learned that God alone merits worship. No other deity could accomplish what the Lord had done for her. Then her song shifted direction. She began describing how God operates throughout the world. Verse 3 warns, "Speak no more with such pride. Let no arrogance proceed from your mouth, for the Lord is a God of knowledge, and by him actions are weighed." This may have been directed at Peninnah, who had mocked her for so long. Hannah sang about God's power to reverse circumstances. Verses 4 and 5 proclaim, "The bows of the mighty are shattered, but the feeble bind on strength. Those who were full have hired themselves out for bread, but those who were hungry have ceased to hunger. The barren woman has borne 7, but she who has many children is forlorn." She spoke from personal experience. The barren woman herself now rejoiced in her son. The song advanced with profound theological truth. Verse 6 states, "The Lord brings death and gives life. He brings down to Sheol and raises up." Verse 7 adds, "The Lord makes poor and makes rich. He brings low and he lifts high." These weren't merely poetic expressions. They were truths Hannah had witnessed within her own life. She sang in verse 8, "He raises the poor from the dust. He lifts the needy from the ash heap to seat them with princes and grant them a seat of honor. For the pillars of the earth belong to the Lord, and upon them he has set the world. God had lifted Hannah from her lowly position and bestowed honor upon her. The song intensified. Verse 9 promises, "He will guard the feet of his faithful ones, but the wicked will be silenced in darkness, for not by might shall a man prevail." Then verse 10 declares, "The adversaries of the Lord will be shattered to pieces. Against them he will thunder in heaven. The Lord will judge the ends of the earth. He will give strength to his king and exalt the horn of his anointed." This final verse is extraordinary. Hannah spoke of a king and an anointed one, a Messiah. Even though Israel possessed no king yet, she prophesied about matters she couldn't completely comprehend, speaking of David and ultimately of Christ himself. Her personal story of redemption pointed toward God's greater plan of redemption for the world. Following this, verse 11 simply states, "Then Elkanah returned home to Ramah, but the boy ministered to the Lord in the presence of Eli the priest." Hannah departed, leaving her son at Shiloh. Samuel's new life had commenced. While young Samuel served faithfully at the tabernacle, a dark corruption festered in Shiloh. Eli had two sons, Hophni and Phinehas, who served as priests like their father. But verse 12 tells us plainly, "Now the sons of Eli were worthless men. They had no knowledge of the Lord." These weren't casual sinners. They were priests actively perverting God's worship. The text details their specific offenses. When anyone came to present a sacrifice, the custom was established. According to verse 13, the practice of the priests with the people was that when any man offered sacrifice, the priest's servant would come while the meat was boiling, with a three-pronged fork in his hand. But Hophni and Phinehas twisted this practice for personal greed. Verse 14 describes how he would thrust it into the pan, kettle, cauldron, or pot. Everything the fork brought up, the priest would claim for himself. They were stealing from offerings dedicated to God. Even more egregious, they demanded the fat portions before burning them on the Lord's altar. Verse 15 explains, "Moreover, before the fat was burned, the priest's servant would approach and say to the man offering sacrifice, 'Give meat for the priest to roast, for he will not accept boiled meat from you, only raw.'" When people objected, saying they would provide meat after burning the fat to God first, verse 16 records the servant's response, "No, you must hand it over now, and if you refuse, I will take it by force." This was extraordinarily serious. Verse 17 declares, "Thus the sin of the young men was very great in the sight of the Lord, for the men treated the offering of the Lord with contempt." They demonstrated contempt not merely for the sacrificial system but for God himself. Their sins extended further. Verse 22 adds another dimension to their wickedness. Now Eli was very old, and he kept hearing everything his sons were doing to all Israel, and how they lay with the women who served at the entrance to the tent of meeting. They were committing sexual immorality right at God's house entrance. Eli confronted them, but his rebuke proved weak and ineffective. He said in verse 23, "Why do you engage in such things? For I hear of your evil dealings from all these people." He continued in verse 24, "No, my sons, it is not a good report that I hear the people of the Lord spreading." Then he warned them in verse 25, "If someone sins against a man, God will mediate for him. But if someone sins against the Lord, who can intercede for him?" The tragic conclusion of verse 25 reveals everything. But they would not listen to the voice of their father, for it was the will of the Lord to put them to death. God had decided their fate. Eli's sons had crossed too far, and judgment approached. Meanwhile, verse 26 provides a stark contrast. Now the boy Samuel continued to grow, both in stature and in favor with the Lord and also with man. While Hophni and Phinehas descended into wickedness, Samuel advanced in godliness. Samuel remained young, serving under Eli in the tabernacle. Chapter 3 opens with these words in verse 1. Now the boy Samuel was ministering to the Lord in the presence of Eli, and the word of the Lord was rare in those days. There was no frequent vision. This marked a spiritually dark period in Israel's history. God wasn't speaking often, and prophetic revelation was scarce. One night, everything transformed. Verse 2 sets the scene. At that time Eli, whose eyesight had begun growing dim so he could not see, was lying down in his own place. Verse 3 continues. The lamp of God had not yet gone out, and Samuel was lying down in the temple of the Lord, where the ark of God was. It was late at night, in those quiet hours before dawn. Then God called. Verse 4 records, the Lord called Samuel, and he said, "Here I am." The boy didn't recognize the voice. He assumed Eli was calling him, so he ran to the elderly priest. Verse 5 tells us, and he ran to Eli and said, "Here I am, for you called me." But he said, "I did not call. Lie down again." So he went and lay down. But God called again. Verse 6 states, and the Lord called again Samuel. And Samuel arose and went to Eli and said, "Here I am, for you called me." But he said, "I did not call, my son. Lie down again." The text adds an important detail in verse 7. Now Samuel did not yet know the Lord, and the word of the Lord had not yet been revealed to him. Samuel had never experienced direct revelation from God before. When God called the third time, Eli finally grasped what was happening. Verse 8 describes the moment. And the Lord called Samuel again the third time. And he arose and went to Eli and said, "Here I am, for you called me." Then Eli perceived that the Lord was calling the boy. Eli gave Samuel crucial instructions in verse 9. Therefore Eli said to Samuel, "Go, lie down, and if he calls you, you shall say, 'Speak, Lord, for your servant hears.'" So Samuel went and lay down in his place. The old priest, despite his failures, recognized God's voice and taught the boy how to respond. When God called the fourth time, it was different. Verse 10 records, "And the Lord came and stood, calling as at other times, 'Samuel, Samuel.' And Samuel said, 'Speak, for your servant hears.'" This time the Lord didn't merely call from a distance. He came and stood near Samuel. What God said next must have shaken Samuel to his core. The Lord began in verse 11, "Behold, I am about to do something in Israel at which both ears of everyone who hears it will tingle." Something shocking was coming, something that would make everyone who heard about it recoil in horror. God continued his message in verse 12. "On that day I will fulfill against Eli everything I have spoken concerning his house, from beginning to end." The judgment would be complete and final. Then God explained why, in verse 13. "And I declare to him that I am about to punish his house forever for the iniquity that he knew, because his sons were blaspheming God, and he did not restrain them." This was the heart of Eli's failure. He knew what his sons were doing. He had heard the reports. He had even confronted them. But he didn't stop them. He didn't remove them from the priesthood. He didn't exercise the authority God had given him. And now, God was holding him accountable. The pronouncement grew even more severe in verse 14. "Therefore I swear to the house of Eli that the iniquity of Eli's house shall not be atoned for by sacrifice or offering forever." No amount of sacrifices could reverse this judgment. It was final. Samuel lay there until morning, processing this devastating message. Verse 15 tells us, Samuel lay until morning. Then he opened the doors of the house of the Lord, and Samuel was afraid to tell the vision to Eli. Can you imagine? This young boy had to inform his mentor, the man who had raised him, that God was going to destroy his entire family. But Eli called him the next morning. Verse 16 records, Then Eli called Samuel and said, "Samuel, my son." And he said, "Here I am." Eli asked in verse 17, "What was it that he told you? Do not hide it from me. May God do so to you, and more also if you hide anything from me of all that he told you." Samuel couldn't withhold it any longer. Verse 18 states, "So Samuel told him everything and hid nothing from him." When he finished, Eli's response was one of humble acceptance. "It is the Lord. Let him do what seems good to him." From that day forward, Samuel's role changed. Verse 19 declares, "And Samuel grew, and the Lord was with him, and let none of his words fall to the ground." Everything Samuel prophesied came to pass. Verse 20 confirms, "And all Israel, from Dan to Beersheba, knew that Samuel was established as a prophet of the Lord." God continued revealing himself to Samuel at Shiloh, and Samuel's words were made known throughout Israel. The judgment God had promised was about to unfold in the most tragic way imaginable. Chapter 4 begins with Israel going out to battle against the Philistines. Verse 1 sets the scene. "And the word of Samuel came to all Israel." Now Israel went out to battle against the Philistines. They encamped at Ebenezer, and the Philistines encamped at Aphek. The battle went poorly for Israel. Verse 2 reports, "The Philistines drew up in line against Israel, and when the battle spread, Israel was defeated before the Philistines, who killed about 4,000 men on the field of battle." The elders gathered to determine what went wrong. Their conclusion is recorded in verse 3. "Let us bring the ark of the covenant of the Lord here from Shiloh, that it may come among us and save us from the power of our enemies." This was a terrible mistake. They were treating the ark like a magic charm, a good luck object guaranteeing victory. They didn't seek God, they simply wanted his power. So they sent to Shiloh. Verse 4 tells us, "The people sent to Shiloh, and brought from there the ark of the covenant of the Lord of hosts, who is enthroned on the cherubim. And the two sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, were there with the ark of the covenant of God." The presence of Eli's corrupt sons should have served as a warning sign. When the ark arrived in the camp, verse 5 describes the reaction. "As soon as the ark of the covenant of the Lord came into the camp, all Israel gave a mighty shout, so that the earth resounded." They were confident now. They thought victory was certain. Even the Philistines were afraid. Verses 7 and 8 record their panic. "The Philistines were afraid, for they said, 'A god has come into the camp.' And they said, 'Woe to us, for nothing like this has happened before. Woe to us! Who can deliver us from the power of these mighty gods? These are the gods who struck the Egyptians with every sort of plague in the wilderness.' But then the Philistine commanders rallied their troops. Verse 9 captures their determination. "Take courage and be men, O Philistines, lest you become slaves to the Hebrews, as they have been to you. Be men and fight." And fight they did. The result was catastrophic. Verse 10 records the disaster. "So the Philistines fought, and Israel was defeated, and they fled, every man to his home. And there was a very great slaughter, for 30,000 foot soldiers of Israel fell. But the worst was yet to come." Verse 11 delivers the crushing blow. "And the ark of God was captured, and the two sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, died. A man from the tribe of Benjamin ran from the battle with his clothes torn and dirt on his head, signs of mourning and disaster. He arrived in Shiloh that same day." Verse 13 describes what he found. "When he arrived, Eli was sitting on his seat by the road, watching, for his heart trembled for the ark of God. Eli was 98 years old and blind, but he heard the commotion. When the messenger told the city what had happened," verse 13 says, "all the city cried out. Eli heard the outcry and asked what it meant. The man rushed to Eli and told him everything." Verse 17 records his report. "He who brought the news answered and said, 'Israel has fled before the Philistines, and there has also been a great defeat among the people. Your two sons also, Hophni and Phinehas, are dead, and the ark of God has been captured.' The moment Eli heard about the ark, something broke inside him." Verse 18 describes his death. "As soon as he mentioned the ark of God, Eli fell over backward from his seat by the side of the gate, and his neck was broken and he died, for the man was old and heavy. He had judged Israel 40 years. Even more tragedy followed. Eli's daughter-in-law, the wife of Phinehas, was pregnant and near her time to give birth. When she heard the news about the ark and the deaths of her father-in-law and husband, she went into labor. Verse 19 tells us, "And when she heard the news that the ark of God was captured and that her father-in-law and her husband were dead, she bowed and gave birth, for her pains came upon her." She was dying in childbirth. The women attending her tried to encourage her, saying in verse 20, "Do not be afraid, for you have borne a son." But she didn't answer or pay attention. Instead, verse 21 records her final words. She named the child Ichabod, saying, "The glory has departed from Israel, because the ark of God had been captured, and because of her father-in-law and her husband." The name Ichabod means no glory, or where is the glory? She said it again as she died, according to verse 22. And she said, "The glory has departed from Israel, for the ark of God has been captured." With those words, she breathed her last. The house of Eli had fallen, precisely as God had promised. The ark's time among the Philistines was a disaster for them. Chapter 5 describes how they placed the ark in the temple of their god, Dagon, in Ashdod. The next morning, they found Dagon fallen on his face before the ark. They set him back up, but the following morning was worse. Verse 4 reports, "But when they rose early on the next morning, behold, Dagon had fallen face downward on the ground before the ark of the Lord, and the head of Dagon, and both his hands were lying cut off on the threshold. Only the trunk of Dagon was left to him. Then God struck the people of Ashdod with tumors." Verse 6 states, "The hand of the Lord was heavy against the people of Ashdod, and he terrified and afflicted them with tumors, both Ashdod and its territory." They decided to send the ark to another city, but the same thing happened there. They sent it to Ekron, and the people cried out in verse 10, "They have brought the ark of the God of Israel around to us, to kill us and our people." After 7 months of plagues, the Philistines had had enough. Chapter 6 describes how their priests and diviners devised a plan to return the ark. They made golden images of their tumors and of the mice that were ravaging their land as a guilt offering. They placed the ark on a new cart, pulled by 2 milk cows that had never been yoked, whose calves were kept at home. If the cows went toward Israelite territory instead of back to their calves, the Philistines would know that Israel's God had caused their suffering. The cows went straight toward Beth Shemesh in Israel, lowing as they went, never turning aside. The people of Beth Shemesh rejoiced when they saw the ark. They offered the cows as a burnt offering to the Lord, but some men looked inside the ark, which was forbidden. Verse 19 records God's judgment, "And he struck some of the men of Beth Shemesh, because they looked upon the ark of the Lord. He struck 70 men of them, and the people mourned because the Lord had struck the people with a great blow." The ark was eventually brought to Kiriath-Jearim, where it remained for 20 years. Chapter 7 verse 2 tells us, "From the day that the ark was lodged at Kiriath-Jearim, a long time passed, some 20 years, and all the house of Israel lamented after the Lord. During this time, Samuel called the people to repentance." Verse 3 records his message, "If you are returning to the Lord with all your heart, then put away the foreign gods and the Ashtaroth from among you, and direct your heart to the Lord, and serve him only, and he will deliver you out of the hand of the Philistines." The people responded. Verse 4 states, "So the people of Israel put away the Baals and the Ashtaroth, and they served the Lord only." Samuel gathered all Israel to Mizpah for a time of confession and fasting. Verse 6 describes what happened. "So they gathered at Mizpah, and drew water, and poured it out before the Lord, and fasted on that day, and said there, 'We have sinned against the Lord.' And Samuel judged the people of Israel at Mizpah. When the Philistines heard that Israel had gathered at Mizpah, they saw it as an opportunity to attack. The Israelites were afraid, and begged Samuel in verse 8, "Do not cease to cry out to the Lord our God for us, that he may save us from the hand of the Philistines." Samuel took a nursing lamb and offered it as a whole burnt offering to the Lord, crying out for Israel. God answered. Verse 10 describes the miracle. As Samuel was offering up the burnt offering, the Philistines drew near to attack Israel. But the Lord thundered with a mighty sound that day against the Philistines and threw them into confusion, and they were defeated before Israel. The men of Israel pursued the Philistines and struck them down. To commemorate this victory, Samuel set up a stone between Mizpah and Shen. Verse 12 tells us, Then Samuel took a stone and set it up between Mizpah and Shen and called its name Ebenezer, for he said, Till now the Lord has helped us. The name Ebenezer means stone of help. The Philistines were subdued and didn't invade Israel again during Samuel's lifetime. The cities they had taken were restored to Israel, and Samuel established his leadership. Verse 15 confirms, Samuel judged Israel all the days of his life. He would travel on a circuit to Bethel, Gilgal, and Mizpah, judging Israel in all those places. But he always returned to his home in Ramah, where he built an altar to the Lord. The age of Samuel had begun. The last judge of Israel was now firmly in place, leading God's people back to faithfulness. When Samuel grew old, he made his sons judges over Israel. Chapter 8, verse 1, introduces them. When Samuel became old, he made his sons judges over Israel. His firstborn was Joel, and his second son was Abijah. They served as judges in Beersheba, but Samuel's sons didn't follow their father's example. Verse 3 reveals their character. Yet his sons did not walk in his ways, but turned aside after gain. They took bribes and perverted justice. The very thing Samuel had avoided, his sons embraced. They were corrupt, using their positions for personal profit and twisting justice for money. The elders of Israel saw this and decided they'd had enough. They gathered together and came to Samuel at Ramah. Verse 4 describes the meeting. Then all the elders of Israel gathered together and came to Samuel at Ramah. What they said next would change everything. Verse 5 records their demand. And they said to him, Behold, you are old, and your sons do not walk in your ways. Now appoint for us a king to judge us like all the nations. They wanted a monarchy. They wanted to be like everyone else around them. They were tired of the system of judges. This request deeply troubled Samuel. Verse 6 tells us, But the thing displeased Samuel when they said, Give us a king to judge us. And Samuel prayed to the Lord. He took his pain and confusion directly to God. God's response must have been both comforting and painful for Samuel. The Lord said in verse 7, Obey the voice of the people in all that they say to you, for they have not rejected you, but they have rejected me from being king over them. This wasn't personal against Samuel. It was rebellion against God himself. God continued in verse 8, According to all the deeds that they have done from the day I brought them up out of Egypt, even to this day, forsaking me and serving other gods, so they are also doing to you. The people had a pattern of rejection. They had always wanted something other than God. But God told Samuel to do something important before giving them what they wanted. Verse 9 instructs, Now then, obey their voice. Only you shall solemnly warn them and show them the ways of the king who shall reign over them. Samuel was to paint a clear picture of what kingship would cost them. Samuel delivered God's warning to the people. He began in verse 11. These will be the ways of the king who will reign over you. He will take your sons and appoint them to his chariots and to be his horsemen and to run before his chariots. Their boys would become the king's soldiers and servants. The warning continued in verse 12. And he will appoint for himself commanders of thousands and commanders of 50s, and some to plough his ground and to reap his harvest, and to make his implements of war and the equipment of his chariots. The king would use their sons for his own purposes, whether farming his land or building weapons. Verse 13 added another layer. He will take your daughters to be perfumers and cooks and bakers. Their daughters wouldn't be exempt from royal service either. The economic costs would be severe. Verse 14 warned, He will take the best of your fields and vineyards and olive orchards and give them to his servants. The king would confiscate their best land and redistribute it to his favorites. Verse 15 continued, He will take the tenth of your grain and of your vineyards and give it to his officers and to his servants. A 10% tax on their produce would go to support the king's court. Even their servants and animals wouldn't be safe. Verse 16 stated, He will take your male servants and female servants and the best of your young men and your donkeys and put them to his work. Everything they owned could be drafted into royal service. Verse 17 summarized the burden. He will take the tenth of your flocks, and you shall be his slaves. They would lose their freedom and become servants of the king they were demanding. Samuel's final warning came in verse 18, And in that day you will cry out because of your king, whom you have chosen for yourselves, but the Lord will not answer you in that day. When they suffered under the king's oppression, God wouldn't rescue them. They would have to live with their choice. But the people refused to listen. Verse 19 records their stubborn response. But the people refused to obey the voice of Samuel, and they said, No, but there shall be a king over us. They wanted what they wanted, regardless of the consequences. They explained their reasoning in verse 20, that we also may be like all the nations, and that our king may judge us and go out before us and fight our battles. They wanted to blend in with the nations around them. They wanted a visible warrior king to lead them into battle. Samuel reported all this back to God. Verse 22 gives God's final instruction, And the Lord said to Samuel, Obey their voice and make them a king. Samuel then said to the men of Israel, Go every man to his city. God would give them what they asked for, even though it would bring them pain. There was a man from the tribe of Benjamin whose name was Kish. Chapter 9, verse 1 describes him. There was a man of Benjamin whose name was Kish, the son of Abiel, son of Zeror, son of Bechorath, son of Aphiah, a Benjaminite, a man of wealth. He was a wealthy and prominent man. Kish had a son named Saul. Verse 2 gives us our first glimpse of him, and he had a son whose name was Saul, a handsome young man. There was not a man among the people of Israel more handsome than he. From his shoulders upward, he was taller than any of the people. Saul was physically impressive, tall, handsome, commanding in appearance. One day, Kish's donkeys wandered off and got lost. He told Saul in verse 3, Take one of the young men with you and arise. Go and look for the donkeys. It was a simple errand. Find the missing animals and bring them home. Saul and his servants searched through the hill country of Ephraim, through the land of Shalisha, through the land of Sha'alim, and through the land of Benjamin, but they couldn't find the donkeys anywhere. After days of searching, they reached the land of Zuph. Saul said to his servant in verse 5, Come, let us go back, lest my father cease to care about the donkeys and become anxious about us. But the servant had an idea. Verse 6 records his suggestion, Behold, there is a man of God in this city, and he is a man who is held in honor. All that he says comes true. So now let us go there. Perhaps he can tell us the way we should go. He was talking about Samuel, though the text doesn't name him yet. Saul raised a practical concern in verse 7. But if we go, what can we bring the man? For the bread in our sacks is gone, and there is no present to bring to the man of God. What do we have? It was customary to bring a gift when consulting a prophet. The servant solved that problem too. Verse 8 says, The servant answered Saul again, Here I have with me 1/4 of a shekel of silver, and I will give it to the man of God to tell us our way. He had a small amount of silver, enough for a modest gift. What Saul didn't know was that God had already prepared Samuel for this meeting. Verse 15 reveals, Now the day before Saul came, the Lord had revealed to Samuel. God told him in verse 16, Tomorrow about this time I will send to you a man from the land of Benjamin, and you shall anoint him to be prince over my people Israel. He shall save my people from the hand of the Philistines, for I have seen my people, because their cry has come to me. When Samuel saw Saul approaching, God confirmed it. Verse 17 states, "When Samuel saw Saul, the Lord told him, 'Here is the man of whom I spoke to you. He it is who shall restrain my people.'" This was the moment. The first king of Israel was walking towards Samuel, not knowing his destiny. Saul approached Samuel at the gate and asked in verse 18, "Tell me, where is the house of the seer?" He had no idea he was speaking to the man he was looking for. Samuel revealed himself and gave Saul astonishing news. Verse 19 records his words, "I am the seer. Go up before me to the high place, for today you shall eat with me, and in the morning I will let you go, and will tell you all that is on your mind." Then he added the news about the donkeys in verse 20. "As for your donkeys that were lost 3 days ago, do not set your mind on them, for they have been found." But Samuel wasn't finished. He said something that must have shocked Saul. "And for whom is all that is desirable in Israel? Is it not for you and for all your father's house?" He was hinting at kingship, suggesting that Saul was the one Israel desired. Saul's response showed humility and confusion. Verse 21 records his answer. "Am I not a Benjaminite from the least of the tribes of Israel? And is not my clan the humblest of all the clans of the tribe of Benjamin? Why then have you spoken to me in this way?" Benjamin was the smallest tribe, and Saul's family wasn't prominent within it. He couldn't understand why Samuel would say such things. Samuel took Saul and his servant to the hall, where about 30 people were gathered for the sacrifice. He gave Saul the place of honor and instructed the cook in verse 23, "Bring the portion I gave you, of which I said to you, put it aside." A special piece of meat had been reserved specifically for Saul. The next morning, at the break of dawn, Samuel called to Saul. As they were going down to the edge of the city, Samuel said to Saul in verse 27, "Tell the servant to pass on before us, and when he has passed on, stop here yourself for a while, that I may make known to you the word of God." This was it. Samuel was about to reveal Saul's destiny. What happened next was private and sacred. Chapter 10 opens with these words in verse 1. "Then Samuel took a flask of oil and poured it on his head and kissed him and said, 'Has not the Lord anointed you to be prince over his people Israel? And you shall reign over the people of the Lord, and you will save them from the hand of their surrounding enemies.'" Samuel anointed Saul with oil, marking him as God's chosen king. But Samuel didn't stop there. He gave Saul specific signs to confirm this anointing was real. The third sign would be the most dramatic. Samuel explained in verse 5, "After that you shall come to Gibeath Elohim, where there is a garrison of the Philistines, and there, as soon as you come to the city, you will meet a group of prophets coming down from the high place with harp, tambourine, flute, and lyre before them, prophesying." Then came the promise that would transform Saul. Verse 6 declared, "Then the Spirit of the Lord will rush upon you, and you will prophesy with them and be turned into another man." The Holy Spirit would come upon him powerfully, and he would be changed at the core of his being. Samuel gave him final instructions in verse 7. "Now when these signs meet you, do what your hand finds to do, for God is with you." Everything happened exactly as Samuel said. Verse 9 confirms, "When he turned his back to leave Samuel, God gave him another heart, and all these signs came to pass that day." God changed Saul's heart, and every prophetic sign occurred just as predicted. When Saul and his servant came to Gibeah, the group of prophets met them. Verse 10 describes what happened. "When they came to Gibeah, behold, a group of prophets met him, and the Spirit of God rushed upon him, and he prophesied among them." The Spirit of God came on him with power, just as Samuel had promised. The people who knew Saul were shocked. Verse 11 captures their reaction. "And when all who knew him previously saw how he prophesied with the prophets, the people said to one another, 'What has come over the son of Kish? Is Saul also among the prophets?'" They couldn't believe what they were seeing. This became a proverb in Israel, as verse 12 concludes. "Therefore it became a proverb, 'Is Saul also among the prophets?' When Saul finished prophesying, his uncle asked where they had been. Verse 14 records the conversation. And Saul's uncle said to him and to his servant, "Where did you go?" And he said, "To seek the donkeys. And when we saw they were not to be found, we went to Samuel." The uncle pressed for more information. But Saul kept the most important part secret. Verse 16 records his answer, and Saul said to his uncle, "He told us plainly that the donkeys had been found." But about the matter of the kingship of which Samuel had spoken, he did not tell him anything. Saul wasn't ready to reveal his anointing yet. Samuel called all the people together at Mizpah. He began by reminding them of what God had done. Verse 18 records his words, "Thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, I brought up Israel out of Egypt, and I delivered you from the hand of the Egyptians and from the hand of all the kingdoms that were oppressing you." But then Samuel confronted them. Verse 19 continues, "But today you have rejected your God, who saves you from all your calamities and your distresses, and you have said to him, 'Set a king over us.' Now, therefore, present yourselves before the Lord by your tribes and by your thousands." The selection process began. Samuel brought the tribes near. Verse 20 tells us the tribe of Benjamin was taken by lot. They narrowed it down further. Verse 21 states, "He brought the tribe of Benjamin near by its clans, and the clan of the Matrites was taken by lot, and Saul the son of Kish was taken by lot." Saul had been publicly selected, but there was a problem. Verse 21 concludes, "But when they sought him, he could not be found." Where was their new king? They asked the Lord, and verse 22 gives God's answer. So they inquired again of the Lord, "Is there a man still to come?" And the Lord said, "Behold, he has hidden himself among the baggage." Saul was hiding among the supplies. The people ran and brought him out. Verse 23 describes the scene. "Then they ran and took him from there, and when he stood among the people, he was taller than any of the people from his shoulders upward." Samuel presented him to everyone. Verse 24 records the moment. "And Samuel said to all the people, 'Do you see him whom the Lord has chosen? There is none like him among all the people.' And all the people shouted, 'Long live the king!' Samuel then explained the rights and duties of kingship. Verse 25 tells us, "Then Samuel told the people the rights and duties of the kingship, and he wrote them in a book and laid it up before the Lord. Then Samuel sent all the people away, each one to his home. Saul also went home." Verse 26 adds, "Saul also went to his home at Gibeah, and with him went men of valor, whose hearts God had touched." God had prepared supporters, but not everyone accepted Saul. Verse 27 reveals, "But some worthless fellows said, 'How can this man save us?' And they despised him and brought him no present, but he held his peace." Saul wisely chose not to respond. About a month later, a crisis arose. Chapter 11, verse 1 describes the threat. "Then Nahash the Ammonite went up and besieged Jabesh-Gilead, and all the men of Jabesh said to Nahash, 'Make a treaty with us, and we will serve you.' But Nahash's terms were brutal. Verse 2 records his response. "But Nahash the Ammonite said to them, 'On this condition I will make a treaty with you, that I gouge out all your right eyes, and thus bring disgrace on all Israel.'" He wanted to humiliate the entire nation. The elders asked for 7 days to send for help. Messengers came to Gibeah and told the people. Verse 4 describes, "When the messengers came to Gibeah of Saul, they reported the matter in the ears of the people, and all the people wept aloud." Saul was coming in from the field when he heard about the weeping. When he learned the news, verse 6 records, "And the Spirit of God rushed upon Saul when he heard these words, and his anger was greatly kindled." Saul acted decisively. Verse 7 describes his dramatic call to arms. "He took a yoke of oxen and cut them in pieces, and sent them throughout all the territory of Israel by the hand of messengers, saying, 'Whoever does not come out after Saul and Samuel, so shall it be done to his oxen.' Then the dread of the Lord fell upon the people, and they came out as one man. The response was massive. Verse 8 counts the troops. When he mustered them at Bezek, the people of Israel were 300,000, and the men of Judah 30,000. Saul divided his forces and planned a dawn attack. Verse 11 describes the battle. And the next day Saul put the people in 3 companies, and they came into the midst of the camp in the morning watch, and struck down the Ammonites until the heat of the day. And those who survived were scattered, so that no 2 of them were left together. It was complete victory. After this triumph, people wanted to execute those who had opposed Saul. But Saul showed mercy. Verse 13 gives his response. But Saul said, "Not a man shall be put to death this day, for today the Lord has worked salvation in Israel." Samuel proposed renewing the kingdom. Verse 15 describes what happened. So all the people went to Gilgal, and there they made Saul king before the Lord in Gilgal. There they sacrificed peace offerings before the Lord, and there Saul and all the men of Israel rejoiced greatly. At Gilgal, Samuel addressed the nation. Chapter 12, verse 1 begins. And Samuel said to all Israel, "Behold, I have obeyed your voice in all that you have said to me, and have made a king over you." Samuel contrasted his leadership with what would come. Verse 2 states, "And now behold, the king walks before you, and I am old and grey, and behold, my sons are with you. I have walked before you from my youth until this day." Then Samuel challenged them. Verse 3 records, "Here I am, testify against me before the Lord and before his anointed. Whose ox have I taken? Or whose donkey have I taken? Or whom have I defrauded? Whom have I oppressed? Or from whose hand have I taken a bribe to blind my eyes with it? Testify against me, and I will restore it to you." The people answered immediately. Verse 4 states, they said, "You have not defrauded us or oppressed us or taken anything from any man's hand." Samuel then reviewed their history and brought it to the present. Verse 12 states, "And when you saw that Nahash, the king of the Ammonites, came against you, you said to me, 'No, but a king shall reign over us,' when the Lord your God was your king." He presented their new reality in verse 13. "And now, behold the king whom you have chosen, for whom you have asked. Behold, the Lord has set a king over you." Then came the conditions. Verse 14 laid them out. "If you will fear the Lord and serve him and obey his voice and not rebel against the commandment of the Lord, and if both you and the king who reigns over you will follow the Lord your God, it will be well." Verse 15 gave the alternative. "But if you will not obey the voice of the Lord but rebel against the commandment of the Lord, then the hand of the Lord will be against you and your king." To drive home his point, Samuel called on God for a sign. Verse 17 states, "Is it not wheat harvest today? I will call upon the Lord, that he may send thunder and rain, and you shall know and see that your wickedness is great, which you have done in the sight of the Lord, in asking for yourselves a king." Verse 18 describes what happened. "So Samuel called upon the Lord, and the Lord sent thunder and rain that day, and all the people greatly feared the Lord and Samuel. They cried out to Samuel in verse 19, "Pray for your servants to the Lord your God, that we may not die, for we have added to all our sins this evil, to ask for ourselves a king." Samuel reassured them, but also challenged them. Verse 20 begins, "And Samuel said to the people, 'Do not be afraid. You have done all this evil. Yet do not turn aside from following the Lord, but serve the Lord with all your heart.'" He gave them hope in verse 22, "For the Lord will not forsake his people, for his great name's sake, because it has pleased the Lord to make you a people for himself." His final words came in verse 25, "But if you still do wickedly, you shall be swept away, both you and your king." Jonathan struck down a Philistine garrison. Chapter 13. Verse 3 tells us, "Jonathan defeated the garrison of the Philistines that was at Geba, and the Philistines heard of it. This provoked the Philistines." Verse 5 describes their response. "And the Philistines mustered to fight with Israel, 30,000 chariots and 6,000 horsemen and troops, like the sand on the seashore in multitude." When Israel saw this, fear took over. Verse 6 records, When the men of Israel saw that they were in trouble, for the people were hard pressed, the people hid themselves in caves and in holes and in rocks and in tombs and in cisterns. Saul was at Gilgal. Verse 8 explains, he waited 7 days, the time appointed by Samuel, but Samuel did not come to Gilgal, and the people were scattering from him. Saul made a disastrous decision. Verse 9 records, so Saul said, bring the burnt offering here to me, and the peace offerings, and he offered the burnt offering. The timing was terrible. Verse 10 states, as soon as he had finished offering the burnt offering, behold, Samuel came. Samuel asked what Saul had done. Verse 11 records Saul's explanation. Samuel said, what have you done, have you? And Saul said, when I saw that the people were scattering from me, and that you did not come within the days appointed, and that the Philistines had mustered at Michmash. He continued in verse 12, I said, now the Philistines will come down against me at Gilgal, and I have not sought the favor of the Lord. So I forced myself and offered the burnt offering. Samuel's response was devastating. Verse 13 records, and Samuel said to Saul, you have done foolishly. You have not kept the command of the Lord your God, with which he commanded you. For then the Lord would have established your kingdom over Israel forever. The pronouncement continued in verse 14. But now your kingdom shall not continue. The Lord has sought out a man after his own heart, and the Lord has commanded him to be prince over his people, because you have not kept what the Lord commanded you. Sometime later, Samuel came to Saul with a command. Chapter 15. Verse 1 begins, and Samuel said to Saul, the Lord sent me to anoint you king over his people Israel. Now therefore listen to the words of the Lord. Verse 2 gives the context. Thus says the Lord of hosts, I have noted what Amalek did to Israel in opposing them on the way when they came up out of Egypt. The command was clear. Verse 3 states, now go and strike Amalek and devote to destruction all that they have. Do not spare them, but kill both man and woman, child and infant, ox and sheep, camel and donkey. Saul won the battle but didn't fully obey. Verse 9 reveals, but Saul and the people spared Agag, and the best of the sheep, and of the oxen, and of the fattened calves and the lambs, and all that was good, and would not utterly destroy them. God's response came to Samuel. Verse 10 records, the word of the Lord came to Samuel, I regret that I have made Saul king, for he has turned back from following me and has not performed my commandments. When Samuel found Saul, the king greeted him cheerfully. Verse 13 records, and Samuel came to Saul, and Saul said to him, blessed be you to the Lord. I have performed the commandment of the Lord. Samuel challenged him. Verse 14 asks, and Samuel said, what then is this bleating of the sheep in my ears and the lowing of the oxen that I hear? Saul blamed the people. Verse 15 gives his excuse. Saul said, they have brought them from the Amalekites, for the people spared the best of the sheep and of the oxen to sacrifice to the Lord your God, and the rest we have devoted to destruction. Samuel delivered one of Scripture's most famous statements. Verse 22 proclaims, and Samuel said, has the Lord as great delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as in obeying the voice of the Lord? Behold, to obey is better than sacrifice, and to listen than the fat of rams. Then Samuel pronounced the verdict. Verse 23 declares, for rebellion is as the sin of divination, and presumption is as iniquity and idolatry. Because you have rejected the word of the Lord, he has also rejected you from being king. After rejecting Saul, the Lord spoke to Samuel. Chapter 16 verse 1 records God's words. The Lord said to Samuel, how long will you grieve over Saul, since I have rejected him from being king over Israel? Fill your horn with oil and go. I will send you to Jesse the Bethlehemite, for I have provided for myself a king among his sons. Samuel was afraid. Verse 2 reveals his concern. And Samuel said, how can I go? If Saul hears it, he will kill me. And the Lord said, take a heifer with you, and say, I have come to sacrifice to the Lord. God gave Samuel a cover for his mission. Samuel did what the Lord commanded and came to Bethlehem. When they arrived, Samuel saw Jesse's eldest son, Eliab. Verse 6 records Samuel's first impression. When they came, he looked on Eliab and thought, "Surely the Lord's anointed is before him." But God corrected him immediately. Verse 7 states, "But the Lord said to Samuel, Do not look on his appearance or on the height of his stature, because I have rejected him. For the Lord sees not as man sees. Man looks on the outward appearance, but the Lord looks on the heart." Jesse presented 7 sons, but God chose none of them. Verse 10 summarizes, "And Jesse made 7 of his sons pass before Samuel. And Samuel said to Jesse, The Lord has not chosen these." Samuel asked Jesse in verse 11, "Are all your young men here?" Jesse replied, "There remains yet the youngest, but behold, he is keeping the sheep." Samuel insisted they send for him. Verse 12 describes David's arrival, "And he sent and brought him in. Now he was ruddy and had beautiful eyes and was handsome. And the Lord said, Arise, anoint him, for this is he." Samuel acted immediately. Verse 13 records the anointing. "Then Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed him in the midst of his brothers. And the Spirit of the Lord rushed upon David from that day forward." The contrast with Saul was stark. Verse 14 reveals, "Now the Spirit of the Lord departed from Saul, and a harmful spirit from the Lord tormented him." Saul's servants noticed his torment. Verse 15 describes their observation. "And Saul's servant said to him, Behold now, a harmful spirit from God is tormenting you." They offered a solution in verse 16. "Let our Lord now command your servants who are before you to seek out a man who is skillful in playing the lyre. And when the harmful spirit from God is upon you, he will play it, and you will be well." One of the young men recommended David. Verse 18 states, "One of the young men answered, Behold, I have seen a son of Jesse the Bethlehemite, who is skillful in playing, a man of valor, a man of war, prudent in speech, and a man of good presence, and the Lord is with him." Saul sent for David. Verse 19 states, "Therefore Saul sent messengers to Jesse and said, Send me David your son, who is with the sheep." David arrived and entered Saul's service. Verse 21 tells us, "And David came to Saul and entered his service, and Saul loved him greatly, and he became his armor-bearer." The music worked as planned. Verse 23 describes, "And whenever the harmful spirit from God was upon Saul, David took the lyre and played it with his hand. So Saul was refreshed and was well, and the harmful spirit departed from him." The Philistines gathered their armies for battle. Chapter 17, verse 1 sets the scene. Now the Philistines gathered their armies for battle. A champion came out from the Philistine camp. Verse 4 introduces him. "And there came out from the camp of the Philistines a champion named Goliath of Gath, whose height was 6 cubits and a span." Verses 5 through 7 describe his armor in detail. Goliath was covered in bronze armor, weighing about 125 pounds, and his spearhead alone weighed 15 pounds. Goliath issued his challenge. Verse 8 records, "He stood and shouted to the ranks of Israel, Why have you come out to draw up for battle? Am I not a Philistine, and are you not servants of Saul? Choose a man for yourselves, and let him come down to me." This went on for 40 days. Meanwhile, Jesse sent David to the battle camp with supplies for his brothers. Verse 17 records the instructions. "And Jesse said to David his son, Take for your brothers an ephah of this parched grain and these 10 loaves, and carry them quickly to the camp to your brothers." David arrived just as Goliath came out to taunt Israel. Verse 23 tells us, "As he talked with them, behold, the champion, the Philistine of Gath, Goliath by name, came up out of the ranks of the Philistines and spoke the same words as before, and David heard him." David asked those around him in verse 26, "For who is this uncircumcised Philistine, that he should defy the armies of the living God?" Word reached Saul, and he sent for David. David volunteered in verse 32. And David said to Saul, "Let no man's heart fail because of him. Your servant will go and fight with this Philistine." Saul tried to discourage him, but David testified about killing lions and bears. Verse 37 records David's confidence. "The Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine." Saul tried to give David his armor, but David couldn't move in it. Instead, verse 40 tells us, "Then he took his staff in his hand and chose 5 smooth stones from the brook and put them in his shepherd's pouch. His sling was in his hand, and he approached the Philistine." Goliath mocked David. Verse 44 records his threat. The Philistine said to David, "Come to me, and I will give your flesh to the birds of the air and to the beasts of the field." David's response was fearless. Verse 45 declares, "Then David said to the Philistine, 'You come to me with a sword and with a spear and with a javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied." He continued in verse 47, "And that all this assembly may know that the Lord saves not with sword and spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hand." David ran toward the giant. Verse 49 records the moment of victory. "And David put his hand in his bag and took out a stone and slung it and struck the Philistine on his forehead. The stone sank into his forehead, and he fell on his face to the ground." Verse 51 describes what came next. "Then David ran and stood over the Philistine and took his sword and drew it out of its sheath and killed him and cut off his head with it. When the Philistines saw that their champion was dead, they fled." After David finished speaking with Saul, something remarkable happened. Chapter 18, verse 1 records, "As soon as he had finished speaking to Saul, the soul of Jonathan was knit to the soul of David, and Jonathan loved him as his own soul. Jonathan made a covenant with David." Verse 3 tells us, "Then Jonathan made a covenant with David, because he loved him as his own soul." Verse 4 describes what Jonathan did. "And Jonathan stripped himself of the robe that was on him and gave it to David, and his armor, and even his sword, and his bow, and his belt." David succeeded in everything. Verse 5 records, "And David went out and was successful wherever Saul sent him, so that Saul set him over the men of war. But then something changed everything as they returned from battle." Verse 7 records the women's song. "And the women sang to one another as they made merry. Saul has struck down his thousands, and David his 10,000s. Saul's reaction was immediate. Verse 8 describes his anger. "And Saul was very angry, and this saying displeased him. He said, 'They have ascribed to David 10,000s, and to me they have ascribed thousands, and what more can he have but the kingdom?' From that moment," verse 9 reveals, "and Saul eyed David from that day on." The next day, an evil spirit came upon Saul, while David played music. Verse 11 records, "And Saul hurled the spear, for he thought, 'I will pin David to the wall.' But David evaded him twice. Saul became afraid of David." Verse 12 explains why Saul was afraid of David, because the Lord was with him, but had departed from Saul. David continued to succeed. Verse 14 declares, "And David had success in all his undertakings, for the Lord was with him, but the people loved David." Verse 16 records, "But all Israel and Judah loved David, for he went out and came in before them." Saul's younger daughter loved David. Verse 20 reveals, "Now Saul's daughter Michal loved David, and they told Saul, and the thing pleased him." Saul saw an opportunity. Saul thought in verse 21, "Let me give her to him, that she may be a snare for him, and that the hand of the Philistines may be against him." David felt unworthy. Verse 23 captures his response. "And David said, 'Does it seem to you a little thing to become the king's son-in-law, since I am a poor man and have no reputation?' Saul set a deadly bride price." Verse 25 records, "Then Saul said, 'Thus shall you say to David, the king desires no bride price except 100 foreskins of the Philistines, that he may be avenged of the king's enemies.'" For Saul thought to make David fall by the hand of the Philistines. But David exceeded the requirement. Verse 27 records, David arose and went, along with his men, and killed 200 of the Philistines. And David brought their foreskins, which were given in full number to the king, that he might become the king's son-in-law. And Saul gave him his daughter Michal for a wife. The result increased Saul's fear. Verse 29 describes, Saul was even more afraid of David. So Saul was David's enemy continually. Yet David kept succeeding. Verse 30 states, Then the princes of the Philistines came out to battle, and as often as they came out, David had more success than all the servants of Saul, so that his name was highly esteemed. Saul's hatred intensified. Chapter 19, verse 1 reveals, And Saul spoke to Jonathan his son, and to all his servants, that they should kill David. But Jonathan warned David, and spoke to Saul on David's behalf. Verse 6 records Saul's oath. And Saul listened to the voice of Jonathan. Saul swore, As the Lord lives, he shall not be put to death. But when war broke out again and David had more success, the evil spirit returned. Verse 10 states, And Saul sought to pin David to the wall with the spear, but he eluded Saul, so that he struck the spear into the wall. And David fled and escaped that night. Saul sent messengers to David's house to kill him, but Michal warned her husband. Verse 11 records, But Michal, David's wife, told him, If you do not escape with your life tonight, tomorrow you will be killed. Michal helped David escape through a window. Verse 12 tells us, So Michal let David down through the window, and he fled away and escaped. Then Michal created a deception. Verse 13 describes, Michal took an image and laid it on the bed, and put a pillow of goat's hair at its head, and covered it with the clothes. When Saul's messengers came, verse 14 records Michal's response. And when Saul sent messengers to take David, she said, He is sick. When the messengers entered, they discovered the deception. Verse 16 tells us, And when the messengers came in, behold, the image was in the bed, with the pillow of goat's hair at its head. David fled to Samuel at Ramah. Verse 18 states, Now David fled and escaped, and he came to Samuel at Ramah and told him all that Saul had done to him. David found Jonathan. Chapter 20, verse 1 records his desperate question. Then David fled from Naioth in Ramah and came and said before Jonathan, What have I done? What is my guilt, and what is my sin before your father, that he seeks my life? Jonathan didn't believe his father would kill David without telling him. But David knew better. Verse 3 records, But David vowed again, saying, Your father knows well that I have found favor in your eyes, and he thinks, Do not let Jonathan know this, lest he be grieved. But truly, as the Lord lives and as your soul lives, there is but a step between me and death. Jonathan committed himself. Verse 4 states, Then Jonathan said to David, Whatever you say, I will do for you. David proposed a test using the new moon feast. His absence would reveal Saul's intentions. Jonathan made a solemn promise in verse 13. But should it please my father to do you harm, the Lord do so to Jonathan, and more also, if I do not disclose it to you and send you away, that you may go in safety. They agreed on a signal using arrows. The feast came. On the second day, Saul noticed David was missing. Verse 27 records, But on the second day, the day after the new moon, David's place was empty. And Saul said to Jonathan his son, Why has the son of Jesse not come to the meal, either yesterday or today? Jonathan gave the excuse they had planned. Saul's anger exploded. Verse 30 records his rage. Then Saul's anger was kindled against Jonathan, and he said to him, You son of a perverse, rebellious woman, do I not know that you have chosen the son of Jesse to your own shame? He continued in verse 31, For as long as the son of Jesse lives on the earth, neither you nor your kingdom shall be established. Therefore send and bring him to me, for he shall surely die. When Jonathan defended David, verse 33 states, But Saul hurled his spear at him to strike him. Saul tried to kill his own son. The next morning, Jonathan went to the field and gave the signal. David emerged from hiding. Verse 41 describes their farewell. And as soon as the boy had gone, David rose from beside the stone heap and fell on his face to the ground and bowed 3 times. And they kissed one another and wept with one another, David weeping the most. Jonathan spoke his final words in verse 42. Then Jonathan said to David, "Go in peace, because we have sworn both of us in the name of the Lord, saying, 'The Lord shall be between me and you, and between my offspring and your offspring forever.'" David went to Nob and received help from Ahimelech the priest. Chapter 21 describes how David received holy bread and Goliath's sword. One of Saul's servants, Doeg the Edomite, witnessed this. David fled to Achish, king of Gath, but the servants recognized him. Verse 11 records, "And the servants of Achish said to him, 'Is not this David, the king of the land? Did they not sing to one another of him in dances? Saul has struck down his thousands, and David his 10,000s. David was terrified and pretended to be insane. Verse 13 describes, "So he changed his behavior before them and pretended to be insane in their hands, and made marks on the doors of the gate, and let his spittle run down his beard." David escaped to the cave of Adullam. Chapter 22, verse 1 tells us, "David departed from there and escaped to the cave of Adullam, and when his brothers and all his father's house heard it, they went down there to him." Others joined David too. Verse 2 describes, "And everyone who was in distress, and everyone who was in debt, and everyone who was bitter in soul gathered to him. And he became commander over them, and there were with him about 400 men." Meanwhile, Doeg reported to Saul about Ahimelech helping David. Saul summoned the priests and accused them of conspiracy. Verse 16 pronounces judgment, "And the king said, 'You shall surely die, Ahimelech, you and all your father's house.' Saul's guards refused to kill the priests, so Saul turned to Doeg. Verse 18 records the massacre. "Then the king said to Doeg, 'You turn and strike the priests.' And Doeg the Edomite turned and struck down the priests, and he killed on that day 85 persons who wore the linen ephod. 1 priest escaped." Verse 20 tells us, "But one of the sons of Ahimelech, the son of Ahitub, named Abiathar, escaped and fled after David." David accepted responsibility. Verse 22 records, "And David said to Abiathar, 'I knew on that day when Doeg the Edomite was there that he would surely tell Saul, I have occasioned the death of all the persons of your father's house.'" David promised protection. Verse 23 concludes, "Stay with me. Do not be afraid, for he who seeks my life seeks your life. With me you shall be in safekeeping." Saul took 3,000 chosen men to search for David. Chapter 24, verse 2 tells us, "Then Saul took 3,000 chosen men out of all Israel and went to seek David and his men in front of the wild goats' rocks. During the pursuit, Saul entered a cave to relieve himself." Verse 3 describes what happened. "And he came to the sheepfolds by the way, where there was a cave, and Saul went in to relieve himself. Now David and his men were sitting in the innermost parts of the cave. Saul walked right into David's hiding place. David's men saw this as divine opportunity. Verse 4 records, "And the men of David said to him, 'Here is the day of which the Lord said to you, Behold, I will give your enemy into your hand, and you shall do to him as it shall seem good to you.' Then David arose and stealthily cut off a corner of Saul's robe. Even this small act troubled David." Verse 5 reveals, "And afterward David's heart struck him, because he had cut off a corner of Saul's robe. David stopped his men from attacking." Verse 6 records, "So he said to his men, 'The Lord forbid that I should do this thing to my Lord, the Lord's anointed, to put out my hand against him, seeing he is the Lord's anointed.' After Saul left, David came out and called after him." Verse 8 describes, "Afterward David also arose and went out of the cave and called after Saul, 'My lord the king.' And when Saul looked behind him, David bowed with his face to the earth and paid homage. David showed Saul the evidence. Verse 11 states, "See, my father, see the corner of your robe in my hand. For by the fact that I cut off the corner of your robe and did not kill you, you may know and see that there is no wrong or treason in my hands." Saul's response was emotional. Verse 16 records, "As soon as David had finished speaking these words to Saul, Saul said, 'Is this your voice, my son David?' And Saul lifted up his voice and wept." Saul acknowledged David's righteousness. Verse 17 continues, "He said to David, 'You are more righteous than I, for you have repaid me good, whereas I have repaid you evil.'" Saul revealed he knew the truth. Verse 20 states, "And now, behold, I know that you shall surely be king, and that the kingdom of Israel shall be established in your hand." Saul asked for mercy. Verse 21 records, "Swear to me therefore by the Lord, that you will not cut off my offspring after me, and that you will not destroy my name out of my father's house." David swore the oath. Verse 22 tells us, "And David swore this to Saul. Then Saul went home, but David and his men went up to the stronghold." Chapter 25 opens with tragic news. Verse 1 announces, "Now Samuel died, and all Israel assembled and mourned for him, and they buried him in his house at Ramah. Then David rose and went down to the wilderness of Paran. In that region lived a wealthy man named Nabal." Verse 2 describes, "And there was a man in Maon whose business was in Carmel. The man was very rich. He had 3,000 sheep and 1,000 goats." Verse 3 gives more detail. "Now the name of the man was Nabal, and the name of his wife Abigail. The woman was discerning and beautiful, but the man was harsh and badly behaved." David sent messengers to Nabal during sheep-shearing season. Verse 8 records David's request, "Therefore let my young men find favor in your eyes, for we come on a feast day. Please give whatever you have at hand to your servants and to your son David." But Nabal's answer was insulting. Verse 10 records, "And Nabal answered David's servants, 'Who is David? Who is the son of Jesse? There are many servants these days who are breaking away from their masters.'" David's reaction was fierce. Verse 13 states, "And David said to his men, 'Every man strap on his sword,' and every man of them strapped on his sword. David also strapped on his sword. And about 400 men went up after David. One of Nabal's servants warned Abigail." Verse 14 describes, "But one of the young men told Abigail, Nabal's wife, 'Behold, David sent messengers out of the wilderness to greet our master, and he railed at them.'" The servant emphasized their protection. Verse 16 states, "They were a wall to us both by night and by day, all the while we were with them keeping the sheep." He warned of danger. Verse 17 declares, "Now therefore know this, and consider what you should do, for harm is determined against our master and against all his house, and he is such a worthless man that one cannot speak to him." Abigail acted quickly. Verse 18 describes, "Then Abigail made haste, and took 200 loaves, and 2 skins of wine, and 5 sheep already prepared, and 5 seahs of parched grain, and 100 clusters of raisins, and 200 cakes of figs, and laid them on donkeys." She didn't tell Nabal. Verse 19 tells us, "And she said to her young men, 'Go on before me, behold, I come after you.' But she did not tell her husband Nabal. When Abigail saw David, she quickly dismounted. Verse 23 tells us, "When Abigail saw David, she hurried and got down from the donkey and fell before David on her face and bowed to the ground." Abigail took responsibility. Verse 24 records, "She fell at his feet and said, 'On me alone, my lord, be the guilt. Please let your servant speak in your ears and hear the words of your servant.'" She urged David not to focus on Nabal. Verse 25 continues, "Let not my lord regard this worthless fellow Nabal, for as his name is, so is he. Nabal is his name, and folly is with him." Abigail pointed out God's intervention. Verse 26 states, "Now then, my lord, as the Lord lives and as your soul lives, because the Lord has restrained you from blood guilt and from saving with your own hand. Now then, let your enemies and those who seek to do evil to my Lord be as Nabal." She prophesied about David's future. Verse 28 continues, "Please forgive the trespass of your servant, for the Lord will certainly make my Lord a sure house, because my Lord is fighting the battles of the Lord." Abigail warned David about unnecessary guilt. Verse 31 states, "My Lord shall not have this as a cause of grief or pangs of conscience for having shed blood without cause, or for my Lord working salvation himself." David recognized wisdom in her words. Verse 32 records, "And David said to Abigail, 'Blessed be the Lord, the God of Israel, who sent you this day to meet me.'" David blessed Abigail. Verse 33 continues, "Blessed be your discretion, and blessed be you who have kept me this day from blood guilt and from working salvation with my own hand." David accepted her gifts. Verse 35 tells us, "Then David received from her hand what she had brought him. And he said to her, 'Go up in peace to your house. See, I have obeyed your voice, and I have granted your petition.'" Abigail returned to find Nabal feasting. Verse 36 describes, "And Abigail came to Nabal, and behold, he was holding a feast in his house, like the feast of a king. And Nabal's heart was merry within him, for he was very drunk. The next morning she told him everything." Verse 37 records, "In the morning, when the wine had gone out of Nabal, his wife told him these things, and his heart died within him, and he became as a stone. 10 days later, God struck Nabal." Verse 38 states, "And about 10 days later the Lord struck Nabal, and he died. When David heard, he praised God." Verse 39 records, "When David heard that Nabal was dead, he said, 'Blessed be the Lord who has avenged the insult I received at the hand of Nabal, and has kept back his servant from wrongdoing. The Lord has returned the evil of Nabal on his own head.' Then David sent and spoke to Abigail, to take her as his wife. Abigail responded with humility. Verse 41 records, "And she rose and bowed with her face to the ground and said, 'Behold, your handmaid is a servant to wash the feet of the servants of my Lord.' She quickly prepared to go. Verse 42 describes, "And Abigail hurried and rose and mounted a donkey, and her 5 young women attended her. She followed the messengers of David and became his wife." The Ziphites betrayed David's location again. Chapter 26 verse 1 records, "Then the Ziphites came to Saul at Gibeah, saying, 'Is not David hiding himself on the hill of Hachilah, which is on the east of Jeshimon?' Saul gathered an army." Verse 2 tells us, "So Saul arose and went down to the wilderness of Ziph with 3,000 chosen men of Israel to seek David in the wilderness of Ziph." David learned of Saul's pursuit and went to scout the camp. Verse 5 describes, "Then David rose and came to the place where Saul had encamped. And David saw the place where Saul lay with Abner the son of Ner, the commander of his army. David asked for a volunteer." Verse 6 records, "Then David said to Ahimelech the Hittite and to Joab's brother Abishai, the son of Zeruiah, 'Who will go down with me into the camp to Saul?' And Abishai said, 'I will go down with you.' They infiltrated the camp at night. Verse 7 tells us, "So David and Abishai went to the army by night, and there lay Saul sleeping within the encampment, with his spear stuck in the ground at his head. And Abner and the army lay around him. Abishai asked permission to kill Saul." Verse 8 records, "Then Abishai said to David, 'God has given your enemy into your hand this day. Now please let me pin him to the earth with one stroke of the spear, and I will not strike him twice.' But David refused." Verse 9 states, "But David said to Abishai, 'Do not destroy him, for who can put out his hand against the Lord's anointed and be guiltless?' David explained God would deal with Saul. Verse 10 continues, And David said, "As the Lord lives, the Lord will strike him, or his day will come to die, or he will go down into battle and perish." Instead, they took evidence. Verse 12 tells us, "So David took the spear and the jar of water from Saul's head, and they went away. No man saw it or knew it, nor did any awake, for they were all asleep, because a deep sleep from the Lord had fallen upon them." David called out from a distance. Verse 14 records, "And David called to the army, and to Abner the son of Ner, saying, 'Will you not answer, Abner?' Then Abner answered, 'Who are you, who calls to the king?' David rebuked Abner. Verse 15 states, "And David said to Abner, 'Are you not a man? Who is like you in Israel? Why then have you not kept watch over your lord the king? For one of the people came in to destroy the king your lord.' David showed them what he had taken." Verse 16 continues, "This thing that you have done is not good. As the Lord lives, you deserve to die, because you have not kept watch over your Lord, the Lord's anointed. And now see where the king's spear is, and the jar of water that was at his head." Saul recognized David's voice. Verse 17 records, "Saul recognized David's voice and said, 'Is this your voice, my son David?' And David said, 'It is my voice, my lord, O king.' David asked why Saul pursued him. Verse 18 states, "And he said, 'Why does my lord pursue after his servant? For what have I done? What evil is on my hands?' Saul admitted his wrong. Verse 21 records, "Then Saul said, 'I have sinned. Return, my son David, for I will no more do you harm, because my life was precious in your eyes this day. Behold, I have acted foolishly, and have made a great mistake.' David offered to return the spear. Verse 22 states, "And David answered and said, 'Here is the spear, O king. Let one of the young men come over and take it.' David declared his innocence." Verse 23 continues, "The Lord rewards every man for his righteousness and his faithfulness. For the Lord gave you into my hand today, and I would not put out my hand against the Lord's anointed." Saul blessed David. Verse 25 concludes, "Then Saul said to David, 'Blessed be you, my son David. You will do many things, and will succeed in them.' So David went his way, and Saul returned to his place." David made a decision born of desperation. Chapter 27, verse 1 records his thinking. "Then David said in his heart, 'Now I shall perish one day by the hand of Saul. There is nothing better for me than that I should escape to the land of the Philistines. Then Saul will despair of seeking me any longer within the borders of Israel, and I shall escape out of his hand.' David took his men to enemy territory. Verse 2 tells us, "So David arose and went over, he and the 600 men who were with him, to Achish the son of Mauch, king of Gath. David and his men settled there with their families." Verse 3 states, "And David lived with Achish at Gath, he and his men, every man with his household, and David with his 2 wives, Ahinoam of Jezreel and Abigail of Carmel, Nabal's widow. When Saul heard David had fled," verse 4 tells us, "and when it was told Saul that David had fled to Gath, he no longer sought him." Saul stopped pursuing David. David asked Achish for a place outside the city. Verse 5 records, "Then David said to Achish, 'If I have found favor in your eyes, let a place be given me in one of the country towns, that I may dwell there. For why should your servant dwell in the royal city with you?' Achish gave him Ziklag." Verse 6 states, "So that day Achish gave him Ziklag. Therefore Ziklag has belonged to the kings of Judah to this day." David lived in Philistine territory for over a year. Verse 7 tells us, "And the number of the days that David lived in the country of the Philistines was a year and 4 months." David raided Israel's traditional enemies. Verse 8 describes, "Now David and his men went up and made raids against the Geshurites, the Girzites, and the Amalekites, for these were the inhabitants of the land from of old, as far as Shur to the land of Egypt." David left no survivors to report the truth. Verse 9 states, And David would strike the land, and would leave neither man nor woman alive, but would take away the sheep, the oxen, the donkeys, the camels, and the garments, and come back to Achish. When Achish asked where David had raided, verse 10 records, when Achish asked, "Where have you made a raid today?" David would say, "Against the Negeb of Judah, or against the Negeb of the Jerahmeelites, or against the Negeb of the Kenites." David lied about his targets. David left no witnesses. Verse 11 explains, and David would leave neither man nor woman alive to bring news to Gath, thinking, lest they should tell about us, and say, so David has done. Such was his custom. All the while he lived in the country of the Philistines. Achish trusted David completely. Verse 12 concludes, and Achish trusted David, thinking, he has made himself an utter stench to his people Israel, therefore he shall always be my servant. The Philistines gathered for war against Israel. Chapter 28, verse 1 describes, in those days the Philistines gathered their forces for war to fight against Israel. And Achish said to David, understand that you and your men are to go out with me in the army. David gave an ambiguous answer. Verse 2 records, David said to Achish, very well, you shall know what your servant can do. And Achish said to David, very well, I will make you my bodyguard for life. The armies gathered for battle. Verse 4 tells us, the Philistines assembled and came and encamped at Shunem, and Saul gathered all Israel, and they encamped at Gilboa. When Saul saw the Philistine army, fear seized him. Verse 5 states, when Saul saw the army of the Philistines, he was afraid, and his heart trembled greatly. Saul tried to inquire of the Lord. Verse 6 reveals, and when Saul inquired of the Lord did not answer him, either by dreams or by Urim or by prophets. God was silent. In desperation, Saul sought a medium. Verse 7 records, then Saul said to his servants, seek out for me a woman who is a medium, that I may go to her and inquire of her. And his servants said to him, behold, there is a medium at Endor. Saul disguised himself and went at night. Verse 8 describes, so Saul disguised himself and put on other garments and went, he and 2 men with him, and they came to the woman by night. And he said, divine for me by a spirit, and bring up for me whomever I shall name to you. The woman was afraid. Verse 9 states, the woman said to him, surely you know what Saul has done, how he has cut off the mediums and the necromancers from the land. Why then are you laying a trap for my life to bring about my death? Saul swore she would be safe. Verse 10 records, but Saul swore to her by the Lord, as the Lord lives, no punishment shall come upon you for this thing. The woman asked, whom to summon? Verse 11 tells us, then the woman said, whom shall I bring up for you? He said, bring up Samuel for me. When the woman saw Samuel, she realized who Saul was. Verse 12 describes, when the woman saw Samuel, she cried out with a loud voice. And the woman said to Saul, why have you deceived me? You are Saul. Saul told her not to be afraid. Verse 13 records, the king said to her, do not be afraid. What do you see? And the woman said to Saul, I see a God coming up out of the earth. Saul asked what he looked like. Verse 14 states, he said to her, what is his appearance? And she said, an old man is coming up, and he is wrapped in a robe. And Saul knew that it was Samuel, and he bowed with his face to the ground and paid homage. Samuel asked why Saul had disturbed him. Verse 15 records, then Samuel said to Saul, why have you disturbed me by bringing me up? Saul answered, I am in great distress, for the Philistines are warring against me, and God has turned away from me and answers me no more, either by prophets or by dreams. Therefore I have summoned you to tell me what I shall do. Samuel rebuked Saul. Verse 16 states, and Samuel said, why then do you ask me, since the Lord has turned from you and become your enemy? Samuel reminded Saul of God's judgment. Verse 17 continues, "The Lord has done to you as he spoke by me, for the Lord has torn the kingdom out of your hand and given it to your neighbor David." Samuel explained why. Verse 18 states, "Because you did not obey the voice of the Lord, and did not carry out his fierce wrath against Amalek. Therefore the Lord has done this thing to you this day." Then came the devastating prophecy. Verse 19 declares, "Moreover, the Lord will give Israel also with you into the hand of the Philistines, and tomorrow you and your sons shall be with me. The Lord will give the army of Israel also into the hand of the Philistines." Saul collapsed in terror. Verse 20 describes, "Then Saul fell at once full length on the ground, filled with fear because of the words of Samuel. And there was no strength in him, for he had eaten nothing all day and all night. The Philistine lords gathered with their armies." Chapter 29, verse 1 tells us, "Now the Philistines had gathered all their forces at Aphek, and the Israelites were encamped by the spring that is in Jezreel. The Philistine lords saw David and his men." Verse 3 records, "The commanders of the Philistines said, 'What are these Hebrews doing here?' And Achish said to the commanders of the Philistines, 'Is this not David, the servant of Saul, king of Israel, who has been with me now for days and years? And since he deserted to me, I have found no fault in him to this day.' But the commanders were angry." Verse 4 states, "But the commanders of the Philistines were angry with him. And the commanders of the Philistines said to him, 'Send the man back, that he may return to the place to which you have assigned him. He shall not go down with us to battle, lest in the battle he become an adversary to us. For how could this fellow reconcile himself to his Lord? Would it not be with the heads of the men here?' They remembered the song about David." Verse 5 continues, "Is not this David of whom they sing to one another in dances? Saul has struck down his thousands, and David his 10,000s. Achish called David and dismissed him." Verse 6 records, "Then Achish called David and said to him, 'As the Lord lives, you have been honest, and to me it seems right that you should march out and in with me in the campaign. For I have found nothing wrong in you from the day of your coming to me to this day. Nevertheless, the lords do not approve of you.' Achish told David to leave peacefully. Verse 7 states, "So go back now, and go peaceably, that you may not displease the lords of the Philistines." David protested, maintaining his cover. Verse 8 records, "And David said to Achish, 'But what have I done? What have you found in your servant from the day I entered your service until now, that I may not go and fight against the enemies of my lord the king?' Achish insisted David return. Verse 10 tells us, "Now then, rise early in the morning with the servants of your Lord who came with you, and start early in the morning and depart as soon as you have light." David and his men left early. Verse 11 concludes, "So David set out with his men early in the morning to return to the land of the Philistines. But the Philistines went up to Jezreel. When David returned to Ziklag, he found disaster." Chapter 30, verse 1 describes, "Now when David and his men came to Ziklag on the third day, the Amalekites had made a raid against the Negeb and against Ziklag. They had overcome Ziklag and burned it with fire. The Amalekites had taken everyone captive." Verse 2 states, "And had taken captive the women and all who were in it, both small and great. They killed no one, but carried them off and went their way. David and his men found the city destroyed." Verse 3 tells us, "And when David and his men came to the city, they found it burned with fire, and their wives and sons and daughters taken captive. They wept until exhausted." Verse 4 describes, "Then David and the people who were with him raised their voices and wept until they had no more strength to weep." David's 2 wives had been captured. Verse 5 states, "David's 2 wives also had been taken captive, Ahinoam of Jezreel and Abigail, the widow of Nabal of Carmel. David's men turned against him." Verse 6 reveals, "And David was greatly distressed, for the people spoke of stoning him, because all the people were bitter in soul, each for his sons and daughters." But David strengthened himself in the Lord his God. David pursued the Amalekites and defeated them, recovering everything. Meanwhile, the battle with the Philistines went badly for Israel. Chapter 31, verse 1 describes the disaster. Now the Philistines were fighting against Israel, and the men of Israel fled before the Philistines and fell slain on Mount Gilboa. The Philistines focused on Saul and his sons. Verse 2 records, "And the Philistines overtook Saul and his sons, and the Philistines struck down Jonathan and Abinadab and Malchishua, the sons of Saul. Saul was critically wounded." Verse 3 states, "The battle pressed hard against Saul, and the archers found him, and he was badly wounded by the archers. Saul asked his armor-bearer to kill him." Verse 4 records, "Then Saul said to his armor-bearer, 'Draw your sword and thrust me through with it, lest these uncircumcised come and thrust me through and mistreat me.' But his armor-bearer would not, for he feared greatly. Saul killed himself." Verse 4 continues, "Therefore Saul took his own sword and fell upon it. The armor-bearer followed Saul in death." Verse 5 states, "And when his armor-bearer saw that Saul was dead, he also fell upon his sword and died with him." Verse 6 summarizes, "Thus Saul died, and his 3 sons, and his armor-bearer, and all his men, on the same day together." The Israelites abandoned their cities. Verse 7 describes, "And when the men of Israel, who were on the other side of the valley, and those beyond the Jordan, saw that the men of Israel had fled, and that Saul and his sons were dead, they abandoned their cities and fled. And the Philistines came and lived in them. The next day, the Philistines found Saul's body." Verse 8 tells us, "The next day, when the Philistines came to strip the slain, they found Saul and his 3 sons fallen on Mount Gilboa. They desecrated his body." Verse 9 records, "So they cut off his head and stripped off his armor, and sent messengers throughout the land of the Philistines to carry the good news to the house of their idols and to the people. They displayed his armor and body." Verse 10 states, "They put his armor in the temple of Ashtaroth, and they fastened his body to the wall of Beth-shan. But the men of Jabesh-Gilead remembered Saul's first victory." Verse 11 describes, "But when the inhabitants of Jabesh-Gilead heard what the Philistines had done to Saul, they acted with courage and honor." Verse 12 records, "All the valiant men arose and went all night, and took the body of Saul and the bodies of his sons from the wall of Beth-shan, and they came to Jabesh and burned them there. They buried the remains and mourned." Verse 13 concludes, "And they took their bones and buried them under the tamarisk tree in Jabesh, and fasted 7 days." If this journey through 1 Samuel has impacted you, please subscribe to this channel so you won't miss our next biblical exploration. Share this video with someone who needs to hear these ancient truths that still speak today, and let us know in the comments which part of Samuel's story resonated most with you. The story continues in 2 Samuel, where David finally claims his throne. But that's a tale for another time. Until then, may you walk in faith, knowing that the same God who guided Samuel, confronted Saul, and protected David is still sovereign today.